This seminar is mainly for staff wives. That is for women who are not employed by the church, but are married to someone on the staff who is. It's for women's workers, that is employed female staff, and it's for those who try to support them. We're really delighted that there are some men here. Thank you guys for turning up. I have no intention of teaching with authority in anything I do. But I do hope that for all of us, we will learn to do ministry amongst staff wives and women on the staff better as a result of this. Well, why do we need a seminar like this? 3 introductory comments. In one sense, everyone in the church, everyone on a staff team needs to be ministered to. No one should ever feel that they are alone with no one to pray with or talk to. And you know full well that the most normal way of a Christian being pastored is by their peer group amongst those you read the Bible with. My husband's already mentioned this. William does not have a special person who is assigned to ask him, how are things? He has a group of wardens who are extraordinarily kind and supportive to him. But really, it's the guys that he has in his Bible study group who look out for him. They check he's having holidays, they ask about the family, they ask if he's okay financially, they ask him if there's anything particular that they can pray for him. And he tells them the truth, as far as it is proper to do that. However, there are some things that it is not appropriate for a member of a church staff to share with her peer group. In Christian work, it is not just what you do, but who you are that matters. Your character, your obedience to Christ, your heavenly mindedness, your godliness, your attitudes. And because in many settings women find themselves working for men, the personal and intimate nature of these matters are not always easy or even appropriate to discuss with your boss. When necessary, William has been able to talk about the very deepest things, extraordinarily personable things, with his male staff. And he has done that with some of the women on the staff too, but this rightly is not the case normally with the staff wives or the women's workers. Contrary to the rather cruel stereotypes, a woman in trouble will not necessarily cry or become sulky or undisciplined or become emotionally turbulent, as I put it. I have met many brave and wonderful women who are silent and uncomplaining, and yet coping with unimaginable stress and difficulty. And someone needs to look after these women. Second introductory point. We want women to thrive and to grow in their ministry. At St Helens, no matter what mess a woman arrives in as she joins the staff or her husband joins the staff, we are aiming that they leave our staff in better shape than when they arrived. Ministry amongst women's workers and staff wives is not just a safety net, it should be intentional, specific training and teaching and pastoring. Ministry is a positive, not a passive or reactive thing. Thirdly, I have come across considerable hesitancy from men about how to do ministry amongst women. Sometimes, in fact, almost always, this is for good and sensitive reasons. A fear of being patronising or intrusive. Very occasionally, this is for patriarchal and awkwardness reasons. A reluctance to take on what appears to be a time-consuming burden. And I hope that this seminar might help these men have a little more confidence in how to do a really good job with the women on their staff. Can I say as introductory too that I am very glad and very aware that in this room there will be women's workers and staff workers, women married to staff together. Now I know that your situations are very different, but there are many similarities too, and I'm hoping that we will be able to understand and appreciate the context for ministry that each has as we discuss these things. So this afternoon you've got a sheet here. It's not particularly zappy, it's black and white ink, but nonetheless it does tell you what we're going to cover. We're going to spend quite a bit of time on expectations that the Bible sets. We're going to look at a few general principles. We're going to look, if you will excuse me, at a worked example, how things work back home in our church. And we're going to, fourthly, look at what you may expect to find as you do ministry with staff workers and women on the staff. And fifthly, I hope that quite a good amount of time will be spent on questions so that we can get, instead of going from general principles, we can go right down to the nitty-gritty stuff. So please do be thinking what you would like to talk about. So first of all, expectations. What does the Bible expect? We're going to start with staff wives. Let's imagine we have a group of concentric circles. We're going to work from the outside towards the inside. So let's start with the outside. What does the Bible teach about women? Well, let's just do a nice, big, broad, general circle. Genesis 1:26, we're made in the image of God, we have dominion over creation, we're equal but different to men. Let's go to the circle inside that. What about married women? Genesis 2, verse 18. Married women are helpers like opposite to their husbands. Don't you just love that bit in Genesis 2? Aha, this at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. So let's move into the next concentric circle, the one inside. What does the Bible teach about Christians? Romans 12:1-2 would be a good place to go. We are people who are being transformed by the gospel and not being conformed to this world. Okay, we're getting a little bit further in. A Christian wife. How about Ephesians 5:22-24? A woman who is submissive to her husband, not fighting him, going in the same direction as him, someone who he can count on to be at his side. But the only verse in the Bible, the very inside of the circles, the only verse in the Bible that I can find that talks to wives of ministers is 1 Timothy 3, verse 11. And if you want to turn up that passage, we're going to be in 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy for the majority of our time. So 1 Timothy 3:11. In the same way, men's wives are to be dignified, not slanderers, but sober-minded, faithful in all things. Now, if you've ever done any work on that passage, you will know that the commentaries are really rubbish. They just literally pass over it. They don't tell us what the words mean, and they are very unhelpful. I haven't found anything that will be really good. I'm sure you'll be able to correct me. But these 4 words, dignified, well, it's the same word as is used in verse 4, talking to the pastor. He must manage his own household well with all dignity, keeping children submissive. Well, I'm afraid it's your guess as much as mine what that word means. I think it's something to do with being in control of yourself. Not slanderers. This means really no gossip, no putting people down, no insinuation, no maliciousness, no careless talk. Sober-minded. I think it's something to do with being thoughtful, realistic, self-controlled. Faithful in all things. You need to be someone that can be trusted and relied upon. I find this passage wonderfully liberating. There is nothing that I can find in the Bible directed to the wives of ministers that talk about my daily activity, how I spend my time, what gifts I'm meant to have, or even what responsibilities I am meant to be taking up. It's all about my character. So, when we do ministry amongst staff wives, we need to be clear about what is really important, about what is expected and what is optional. Now, I say this because the staff wife may well have the wrong expectations put upon her. You know what it's like, this wonderful new couple arrive in a parish. It happened to me. Brilliant, hooray, Emily's just arrived. She can run the women's Bible studies, she can host the staff party, she can see that particularly difficult girl that everybody else has slightly given up with. It's obviously a ridiculous situation, isn't it? When you consider how different wives are. When you think about the variety of training that wives have had. They may be extrovert or introvert. How can I put this politely? Different levels of intelligence. Not all staff wives have the same kind of academic background. Think about the gifts that God has given them. Then she may be at work full time. She may have young children. She may be suffering from terrible depression or other kinds of mental illness. She may have elderly parents. She may need to be freed from these wrong expectations, comforted and encouraged to be dignified, not a slanderer, sober-minded, and faithful in all things. But also, the staff wife may have the wrong expectation of what she must be or should be allowed to do. Just because you sleep with the vicar, you cannot assume to run the women's work. It is not your automatic right to be able to take decisions about the church buildings, the management, the food that we eat. You may not get a say on the colour of the new church chairs. It is not okay for you to invade the staff meetings, to overrule structures, or even to direct personnel. When a staff wife assumes the right to these things, she will wrongly invade the space of the woman's worker or other laywomen in responsibility in the church. She will stop every member ministry amongst the people of God, and she will be a complete pain. I know that because I have done all of those things. So, expectations for the staff wife. What about expectations for the woman's worker? Again, it's good to be clear what the Bible expects of a woman's worker. If the boss or the vicar or the team leader wants a secretary, then he needs to find someone who is good at doing secretarial tasks. If he wants someone with a flair for putting on social events in the church, then he needs to find someone who's an events manager or a really good cook. If you want someone who can look after the babies during the women's Bible study, then get a nanny. The Bible is clear about what a woman's worker should be doing, and you'll know this verse I'm sure, by heart, 2 Timothy 2:2, but I thought we would just look at it together. What you have heard from me, Paul, in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men or women who will be able to teach others also. So what is the job of a woman's worker? She is to find trustworthy women. She's to train them to teach other trustworthy women, to train and teach other trustworthy women, etc., as we go along. So a woman's worker doesn't just do pastoral stuff. She is a Bible trainer. If your woman's worker does her job well, you will find that your church has the best trained, most biblical, keenest, zealous, not only Bible study leaders, but also the best secretaries, the best events managers, childminders of the whole diocese, and you will be the envy of all. And she might need reminding of this, and maybe her boss might need reminding of this too. My husband tells us every year at the beginning of the year in staff training that the paid ministry staff are not there to be the best friend of the congregation. You're not there to be a social worker. You're not there to be a good neighbour. You're not their doctor. You're not their psychiatrist. You're not their counsellor, or even the fourth emergency service. You're there to be teaching the Bible and to be training disciples. You may find that the reason that your woman's worker is exhausted, or dare I say ineffective, is because she's slipped into doing the wrong job. She's trying to fix things that she can't fix. You may need to check what the Bible expects of her as you begin to do ministry with her. Now, whilst we're on expectations, may I slip in some other things that may help in ministry with these women? I just thought I'd talk about expectations of the husband and the team leader. Is it okay if you're sitting in the dark? Okay, let's talk about expectations of husbands and team leaders for a moment. 1 Timothy 3, just look at that list. He must be, verse 2, a good husband. He has to be above reproach, the husband of one wife. Verse 4, he has to be a good father. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. He needs, verse 7, to be a good bloke. He must be well thought of by outsiders so that he may not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil. And then if you move on to 2 Timothy, the list goes on. He mustn't be a coward. He needs to be a faithful preacher. He must find time for dealing pastorally and sensitively with the errant members of his congregation. The list goes on and on. The staff wives tell me that they know that as their husbands try unsuccessfully to fulfill these expectations, they can end up feeling near the bottom of a very long to-do list. The women's workers tell me that their bosses are often the best men that they have ever met, and that they worry about being over-reliant on them in an unhealthy way. It's good to set biblical expectations again. There is nothing about the boss being a good man manager, good at building projects, fun to be with, centre of attention, always positive and full of confidence. These men are conceited, selfish, tempted to seek the praise of men, just like the rest of us. What about expectations of the team relationship? Romans 12 gives a beautiful picture of how the church should look, and I suppose that this can be applied to how a staff team should work. Let me just read a few verses to you from Romans 12. Verse 3, every one of you are not to think of yourself more highly than you ought to. Verse 9, let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honour. The Bible gives us high expectations of the church staff team. However, you should not expect that the staff team becomes your social life. Inevitably, those interested in the footy are going to talk about it, excluding those who hate the footy. Inevitably, those with children are going to talk about them unwittingly, causing pain to those without children. Some bosses are just dreadful at talking to women. I did a very great deal of research for this seminar, and I interviewed loads of women on the staff, women's workers and staff wives for this. And I have got so many awful stories that I could tell you. Now, the Bible sets our expectations about staff teams in a godly and realistic way. There are very high standards relationally, but there is nothing specific or mandatory about how the team functions. And lastly, the Bible sets correct expectations of ministry itself. 2 Timothy is littered with information. It is hard work. Remember the three metaphors in 2 Timothy 2 of the soldier, the athlete, and the farmer. The results and even the work are usually unseen and unprovable. People let you down all the time. Remember that even the Apostle Paul, after his trial in Rome, he commented, and I quote, "At my first defence, no one came to stand by me, but all deserted me. And again, all who are in Asia turned away from me." So to be involved in ministry as a woman, you do need to be robust. You cannot be someone who has to be treated with kid gloves. You cannot be someone who gets easily offended, so that those around you feel that they are walking on eggshells all the time. You will certainly be battered. There will be a good amount of patching up to be done, and not all women are suited to a whole life of this kind of work long term. And spare a thought for those staff wives who thought that they were going to be married for 60 years to a lawyer, and have ended up a vicar's wife in a hostile parish, miles away from civilization and family, no money, and little appreciation of the way that their husband is serving the congregation. So we move now to a few principles. You will not be surprised that the first thing I want to say is that the Bible has to be intentionally, visibly, practically central in all ministry. If we believe that the Bible is profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness, that the woman of God may be competent, equipped for every good work, then ministry has to be more than meeting up for a coffee, a chat, and a pray. We are missing out on the direction, the boundaries, the motivation, and the power that these women most need. You won't be surprised that the second principle is this: relationships between people are very important. Rarely will you hit it off and have deep and meaningful conversations in the first few months of meeting. Relationships improve over time as you learn to trust each other. And the only way for these to improve is for there to be regular, reasonably frequent meetings. My third principle, line management really works. By this, I mean the pyramid structure of managing a group of workers. So at the top, you have the boss. Next tier down, you have team leaders. Next tier down, you have perhaps the long-term staff. Next tier down, you have maybe the short-term staff. I don't know how your church structures will work. If line management is not being carried out diligently, there is plenty of room for things to go wrong. Line management works really well. It provides clear lines of responsibility, direction, accountability, as well as being a safety net. However, fourthly, the pyramid structure of boss looking after the next layer and so on down the ladder will not work sufficiently well pastorally, as this involves men and women pastoring each other. Now, the next bit, please excuse me, I'm going to share an example of how this works at our home church. Please understand that I am not saying that this is the right way to do things, but I thought that a concrete example might give you something to disagree with or even agree with. So we're going to talk first of all about the staff wives. Very importantly, William asked me to take care of the wives of the men on the staff. William could have chosen someone else to do this if I was unable to do this due to illness or busyness. It certainly does not have to be the minister's wife, but it does have to be the minister who assigns this job to somebody. As it happens, it has become one of the main things that I do, and I have come to see how immensely worthwhile this investment of my time is. I've made sure that the staff wives know that our meetings are a huge priority. I pay for childcare for them if necessary, out of my own pocket and as part of my Christian giving. I provide delicious food for any meals that we have together. I am ready for them when they arrive. We start and finish on time. I want to spoil, encourage, treat, love them, affirm them. And I want them to know how much my husband appreciates their ministry as they support their husbands at St. Helens. We have very clear parameters about our meetings. The meetings that we have together as staff wives are not at all the same as their regular women's meetings when they can talk about their children, the education choices they're making, evangelism, even their personal quiet times. To be honest, I don't need to know their intimate secrets or even the details of their lives. I do love the women I meet with, and sometimes they choose to tell me and share me with these things, but that is not the reason I'm meeting with them. We meet to talk about how to support our husband's ministry, how his ministry affects our marriages and our family, and we meet to pray for this ministry. Once every 2 or 3 weeks, we meet for lunch or supper, depending on whether or not the women are out during the day working. And we meet at whoever's house is most convenient. We chat. I then read a passage of scripture concerning pastoral ministry. I have an unashamed syllabus. We do 1 Timothy, where we discuss the church, the pillar and buttress of the truth. We go to 2 Timothy, where we talk about pastoral ministry, guarding the gospel, what ministry looks like for a pastor. We go through 2 Corinthians, where we talk about how ministry is weak and how ministers are weak. And then we go through the Sermon on the Mount, which I know is about lots of things, but there's a load about hypocrisy and godliness and being different on the inside to what you are on the outside. Now, in a really inadequate way, I've put some of the things that I put, some of the Bible studies on the back of your sheet here. I ask 4 questions. These are good questions. I summarise the main point of the passage for them in about 3 short sentences. Then I ask 4 questions. 1, what does this passage teach our husbands about ministry? 2, if this is what our husbands are told to do, how can we support them to do this better? 3, what effects do these decisions have on you and on your families? And 4, how can we pray for ourselves as ministry families in light of this? It's not difficult, it's not complicated. Once a term, we have supper together, and I invite someone who has a specialised gift to come and train us in something that will be really helpful for us in our ministry at St Helens, or probably when the women move on from St Helens and their husbands go to pastor at a church without anyone else. We've had evenings on depression. We've had an evening on how to explain the gospel, particularly to Asian culture. We've had something on how to prepare couples for marriage. We've had something on how to look after men and women with same-sex attraction. We've even had an evening on how to have a good devotional quiet time instead of just being a professional teacher of the Bible. Meeting like this has done a very great deal of good for our staff team. That's partly why I want to get back. We are so lucky at St Helens. There is real unity. It is quite extraordinary. It has caused real unity and peace. There have been the occasional times when William might have had to tell off a member of his staff and has probably treated some of the men on the staff rather unfairly, and vice versa. Eating a meal and praying together is a brilliant way for stopping resentment or anger to grow or foster. It has trained the wives in areas that they feel inadequate in, and it has equipped them for years of further ministry. It has been so good for our marriages, making us support and appreciate our husbands. Our husbands I have never known a husband of a woman at St Helens ever do anything but encourage their wives to go to staff wives, because they know that we are teaching each other and praying for them, and our husband knows that we're never going to gossip, we're never going to talk about them personally, we're never ever going to complain about our husbands or do anything untoward like that. And it's given us an opportunity to be honest with each other without moaning and grumbling about the difficulties that we face as ministry wives, and to pray for each other without being judgmental or disappointed with each other. The women's workers. I think I've said it already, but it is the boss's responsibility to see the women's worker regularly, once a fortnight as a minimum. If your boss isn't asking you about your work, if he isn't chatting through ministry with you, it is hard to know if you are valued or respected, whether your opinion is worthwhile, or how your work is part of the whole church's ministry. If you are meeting your boss regularly, things can't fester and get out of proportion. The boss is in charge of the whole church, including the women's ministry, and not to show any interest or concern or any direction to your women's worker is a very demoralising thing. It is the boss's job to ensure that the women's worker is being trained, going to conferences, and doing her job well. The team leaders at St Helens are pretty good at welcoming the women's workers into their families. There are clear boundaries, but genuine warmth. There's one women's worker who is godparent to her boss's children. They all have good relationships with their boss's wife. And that hasn't happened quickly. It has happened by, on both sides, people putting in time, meeting up, and letting that relationship develop. However, William has suggested to the women's workers that they meet up about once a month with an older woman in the church. Ideally, the choice of this woman should be agreed on by both William and the women's worker together. If you like, it's permission granted to be honest, to talk about relationships on the staff, and to let your guard down. These meetings serve as a safety net should there be any overwhelming problems that the woman's worker is facing in her ministry. It also enables someone to be giving the woman's worker encouragement, warmth, and guidance that would be perhaps too intimate or inappropriate for a male boss to be giving her. With the women that I meet up with, we have a very set agenda. They know that I will always ask them the 3 R's: rest, relationships, responsibilities. Another girlfriend told me a few weeks ago that when she meets up with women, she asks the worm questions. Are you walking with the Lord? Are you being obedient? How are relationships? What's going on in your ministry? Now, what are the issues that will come up? Well, who knows? This is where my research came in. This is what people told me. For the staff wives, my husband is working too hard and he is neglecting me and his children. Resentment of the church for making too many demands on your husband. Insecurity because of this goldfish bowl syndrome. I expect you know what I mean. Bringing up your family in the limelight. Loneliness, being left at home looking after children whilst your husband goes out doing this wonderfully fulfilling ministry. Friendships, finding it, to be honest, quite hard to navigate who are real friends and who just wants access to the leadership team and the pastor. Resentment that husband is learning and growing so much in a way that you used to do and are trained to do, but you have been left behind, having to go out to secular work to support the ministry, or maybe even do drudgery work behind the scenes. Discouragement that there is so little fruit for so much effort. What are the issues for women's workers? The kind of things the women have been telling me. On the one hand, they are available to all, any time of day and night. Many of their congregation members consider the women's worker to be their very best friend with good reason. So they are available, but at the same time unavailable, to have a normal social life, because when their friends are working, when their friends are playing, they are working. On the one hand, the women's worker is a public figure. She's known by all, she's on show. But this woman also needs privacy. I asked the women's workers at St Helens, are there any questions that you find really intimidating and you just don't want to be asked because they are to do with your private life? And it was so interesting. They all had different answers. Some people said, is there a man on the scene? Was about death to them. But for some of the other girls, it was things like, well, who are your real friends at St Helens? And they found that really intimidating because they suddenly thought, I haven't got any real friends. And it became a really threatening thing. Have you made any chance of you getting a mortgage? It was a terrible question to ask a women's worker because there is no chance on her salary that she will be doing that. So a public figure, but needing privacy about certain things. Women's worker is appreciated by many, but she is unappreciated perhaps by her parents, by her peer group, maybe even others on the staff, because the women's worker is not usually up front preaching, and her work is more often than not unseen. The women's worker is rich in job satisfaction. I mean, why not spend your life ministering to women? What better way could you possibly spend your life? They are rich in job satisfaction, but they are poor in money. It's hard to have a holiday, a mortgage, clothes, a car. The women's worker is loved by the church, but she may still be lonely. Your peer group becomes more and more worldly. They get married, they move away. Decisions on who to holiday with becomes more difficult. There's no one at the end of the day to debrief with when you've had an absolutely terrible day at work. The women's worker is valuable, but vulnerable. Will my job still be there when I'm 60? Moving job, if I don't like my boss and the situation, well, it's all very well, but I leave my closest relationships when I move job. She knows that she will never be the overall boss at work, so she is always vulnerable as the boss changes and teams move on. She is free. She can organise her day exactly as she likes. But I have met many women's workers who frankly are floundering. They are overwhelmed by work. Sometimes they display a lack of discipline in areas of housework, diet, exercise, time off, holidays. And obviously, the women's worker is in. She's on the staff team. She's there at the strategic planning meetings. She's in the know. She knows everybody. She knows all the gen that's going on the staff. But fundamentally, she is out because she doesn't have the same access to the boss as his wife does, as they share pillow talk. Sometimes the boss will talk more freely to his senior staff team unfairly than he does to his women's worker. So, that's the end of what I'm going to say. We have looked at expectations, we've looked at principles, we've looked at a work example, and we've looked at some of the issues. That is really quite enough from me.